I am Elizabeth, 27 years old, and the middle child of the prestigious Allen family of Atlanta. I always felt like the black sheep growing up, never quite fitting the mold my parents crafted. When I passed the bar exam last month instead of joining the family business, I thought they might finally be proud. But I was wrong. Last night, I returned home for a family dinner celebrating my brother's engagement. The moment I walked through those familiar doors, I felt the tension. I never imagined that by dessert, my parents would look me in the eye and say those words that changed everything. Before I tell you how my life collapsed, write a comment below with your country, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you've ever been treated like an outsider in your own family. I grew up learning my father's biography by heart, the way other kids learn lullabies. Charles Allen built a billion-dollar construction empire, always first in the office and last to leave, a man who could read a blueprint like scripture. He started with 3 trucks and a beat-up Ford, then stacked concrete and favors until the company rose taller than most of the buildings it built. At home, he paced with a Bluetooth in his ear, speaking in bids and margins even at breakfast. If you wanted his attention, you learned to speak in deliverables. "What's the outcome?" he'd ask when I told him about anything: school, friends, a book I loved. Love, in our house, was performance evaluated against projections. My mother, Susan, made the Allen name feel like a brand launch every day. She had a calendar for people the way Dad had one for projects, galas, fundraisers, museum openings, luncheons that required hats with personality. She kept a velvet box of place cards in a desk drawer, annotated with tiny pencil notes: who donated last year, who owed us, or who we owed. If Dad built, she burnished. Before every function, she'd sweep the house like a curator, swapping art, adjusting lighting, smoothing the world into a photograph that would look expensive on someone else's feed. When she said, "Smile," it wasn't a request, it was a strategy. There were 3 of us, and the lanes were painted early. Daniel, 2 years older, understood assignments. He thrived at the military academy: shined shoes, perfect corners, a bed you could bounce a quarter off. He liked rules because rules told him how to win. When he came home on breaks, he corrected the angle of our father's picture frames and ironed his t-shirts like dress uniforms. After graduation, the MBA made sense. It was a promotion written into his blood. He spoke our father's language, fluent in EBITDA and chain of command. At dinner, Dad would ask for updates and Daniel would deliver them like briefings: concise, confident, inevitable. "That's leadership," Dad would say, as if praising a well-trained dog. And Daniel didn't mind. He liked the pat. Catherine, the youngest, was labeled wayward in the same breath they called her charming. Her rebellions were curated: platinum hair for a semester, then a chic bob approved by a stylist on Peachtree. She drew on everything: napkins, placemats, the backs of Dad's old RFPs. Yale's design program loved her portfolio of disciplined chaos. So did our mother's friends. A real eye, they'd murmur over canapes, admiring the way Catherine could make a chair look both antique and dangerous. Her shows were full of the right people: gallery owners, decorators, a tech founder's wife who commissioned a mural for her pool house and paid for it with a necklace we all pretended was an honorarium. Catherine's deviations, our mother liked to say, had context. We learned to make introductions the way we learned to tie shoes. Elizabeth Allen, daughter of Charles and Susan. Your own identity came after the comma, if at all. Sunday dinners were the weekly board meeting. Roast beef, asparagus lined like soldiers, potatoes roasted with thyme from a garden that had a gardener. Dad at the head, Mom at the opposite end, Daniel to his right, Catherine to her left, me floating wherever the empty chair was. Discussion items: Daniel's leadership seminar, Catherine's installation in a Buckhead hotel, the latest golf tournament benefiting a hospital wing with our name on it. If silence fell, it was filled with goals. By 30, Dad would say, tapping the table with a knuckle, "Each of you should be contributing something measurable to the brand." Even holidays were productions. Christmas trees tall enough to challenge the ceiling, a florist team humming through the foyer with garlands like couture gowns. Place settings matched the dress code, gifts matched the recipient's future. Daniel got leather portfolios and fountain pens that lived in boxes. Catherine got sketchbooks from a boutique in New Haven that carried paper so heavy it made pencils sound like whispers. I was given books on leadership for young women with gold-foiled covers, as if ambition could be embossed. School nights came with drills. Daniel timed his run around the block, reporting splits like numbers on a dashboard. Catherine rehearsed her artist statement. Mom listened, head tilted, editing adjectives that sounded too raw. I learned the art of being presentable, hair smooth, clothes neat, opinions softened at the edges. In the Allen house, a question was acceptable only if it improved the status quo. Curiosity is fine, Mom would say, as long as it isn't messy. When people asked what it was like growing up with all that money, I used to say comfortable and leave out the rest. Expectations did not cushion, they defined. The brand came first. We were fortunate, yes, but fortune was a job description. And the job had a dress code, a script, and a performance review you never quite passed. At 16, the school counselor slid a permission slip across her desk and told me I'd been matched with a tenants' rights nonprofit for my junior year internship. The word matched sounded like a dating app for futures. At home, my mother glanced at the form and said, "How quaint," as if I were signing up to knit scarves for kittens. My father didn't bother to look. "Real internships are at banks," he said, reaching for his phone. But despite their words, I signed anyway. On the first morning, I rode a MARTA train that smelled like rain and coffee, clutching a brown bag lunch because I didn't know if interns were allowed to eat the catered kind. The office was 2 rooms above a laundromat on Memorial Drive. The waiting area had mismatched chairs, a crooked bulletin board, and a plant that refused to die. The first person I met was Miss Lena, who ran the front desk with a smile that could quiet a room. "You're the new intern," she said, handing me a stack of intake forms. "Start here. People tell you their whole lives on these lines." She was right. Each clipboard was a story. Mold in a bathroom, a landlord who lost the repair requests, rent raised after a broken heater stayed broken, an eviction notice taped to a door like a dare. I had grown up in a house where problems were removed through phone calls and money, but in this place, problems arrived in plastic grocery bags filled with documents and unpaid invoices. On day 3, I sat in on my first consultation. A single mom named Karina came in with a stroller and a binder of emails, hands trembling as she explained that her landlord refused to fix a leak that soaked the carpet. "My baby has asthma," she kept repeating, voice breaking on every third word. The lawyer, a weary man in a rumpled suit named Reyes, listened without interrupting, then began to outline steps, certified letters, city code violations, a timeline for remedies. His voice was steady, almost gentle. When Karina started crying, he slid a box of tissues across the table and said, "You're not alone." It was the most radical sentence I had ever heard a professional say. My job was small, copying forms, translating bureaucratic English into human sentences, calling the city inspector's office, and staying on hold until a person picked up. But every task produced something tangible, a letter sent, a hearing scheduled, a landlord suddenly returning a call. People came in with shoulders up around their ears and left a little taller. I started to see the law not as a wall but as a door. It could be slammed, yes, but it could also be opened. So I brought that feeling home like contraband. At dinner, I tried to describe the work. "We helped a family get an extension on their eviction," I said, excited. My father set down his fork. "You kept them from paying rent?" Daniel chuckled as if I had told a joke. "No," I said, heat climbing my neck. "We kept them from being thrown out while the landlord fixes the wiring he was supposed to fix months ago." My mother sipped wine. "Elizabeth, darling, this is very noble. But you're spending your summer in a laundromat's attic while your friends are interning at real firms. Optics matter." I wanted to tell her about Karina's relief when the inspector's citation came through, how it felt more real than any chandelier in our house. Instead, I said nothing and cleared the plates. By August, I had memorized the city housing code better than my AP US history dates. I followed Reyes into court one morning, sat on a hard bench, and watched him argue a case with a stubborn grace that reminded me of Miss Lena's smile. He used words like tools, precise and unglamorous, building a small shelter right there under the judge's gaze. On the train home, I stared at my reflection in the window and thought, I really want to do that. Not sit at a gala table and say we support justice, but actually practice it, day after day, with copy paper and patience. When senior year rolled around, I told my parents I was applying to Georgetown. For law, I added, because ambiguity was a luxury I couldn't afford. The room went very quiet. My father's jaw tightened. Finance first, he said. Then you can decorate your resume with whatever passion project you like. My mother touched my wrist, a soft restraint. Think long-term, Lizzie. The Allen name opens doors in finance. Law is combative. You don't have to prove anything. I printed my application anyway, slid it into an envelope, and mailed it without announcing it like a scandal. The acceptance arrived in a thick packet. I opened it on the kitchen island because the marble felt cold enough to steady me. Daniel was there, filling a water bottle. He whistled low. That's big. He didn't hug me. Catherine read the first page, eyes bright. DC will love your coats, she said, half teasing, half sincere. I waited for my parents. Dad came in last, loosened his tie, glanced at the letter, and set it down as if it were a receipt. So you're serious? When I nodded, he pinched the bridge of his nose and laughed once, humorless. Georgetown law. To fight landlords. Do you hear yourself? You're squandering access people would kill for. That night at dinner, he banged his fist on the table hard enough to rattle the glasses. You are disgracing the family name, he stated, each word like a gavel. After everything we've provided. My mother didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She tilted her head the way she did when a centerpiece was off by an inch. We gave you everything, she said softly, and you choose to disappoint us. I looked at the monogrammed napkin in my lap, the embroidery perfect, and realized it had always been a flag. I told myself I wouldn't shake when I rang the bell. I had a license number in my wallet and ink still fresh on the letter that confirmed it. I had passed the bar. Maybe now they'll see I'm not a nobody, I thought, studying my reflection in the brass doorplate. I wore the navy sheath my mother once praised, understated, expensive, respectable, and my grandmother's small pearl earrings, the last gift from the only Allen who ever told me I was enough even when I wasn't performing. The house glowed like a showroom. Crystal flutes caught the chandelier light and threw it back like gossip. The kitchen smelled of butter and something sweet that made the air warm in my throat. Tonight was Daniel's engagement dinner, which meant everything was curated, including our smiles. I arrived early, as instructed in the family group text written in my mother's voice, even though it had Daniel's name on it. She swept toward me in pale silk, air-kissing both cheeks, eyes skimming my dress like a scanner checking for defects. Punctual, good, she said. The Hensleys come at 7. The florist went too heavy on the white peonies, but perhaps they'll read bridal. She touched the pearls at my ears. Your grandmother's? I nodded. She would like that, Mom said, which in her language meant this was forgivable. Daniel found me in the dining room, where the place cards fanned out like a seating chart for destiny. He looked sharp, happy, exactly as expected. Liz, he grinned, giving me a quick hug that smelled like cologne and victory. Big night. He didn't ask about my big week. He didn't know yet. I saved it like a secret flame. Guests arrived in tidy waves. Partners from Dad's firm, Mom's charity board, the bride's parents with a practiced kind of warmth. Catherine floated through in an ink-black dress, murmuring about the custom table installations she was pitching to a hotel in Miami. I poured sparkling water and tried not to watch my father, who stood near the bar, dispensing handshakes like awards. He looked younger in a room that adored him. Cocktails bled into appetizers, the house humming at just the right volume, the way my mother liked it, busy enough to feel important, quiet enough to hear a compliment land. Toasts began. Daniel thanked our parents, thanked his fiancée, thanked the future. My father stepped in with a short speech about legacy and steadiness. Then came the casual talk that never is casual, tax strategies disguised as anecdotes, a new marina membership, a cheeky mention of a weekend in Bimini, once the yacht gets her upgrades. The fiancé's ring was admired like an Olympic medal, oval diamond, custom setting, a kind of sparkle that felt engineered. I waited for the lull I knew would come, the soft pocket of quiet when plates were cleared and dessert hadn't yet landed. I felt the pearls in my earlobes and my grandmother's hand at my back the way you can feel a memory press between your shoulder blades. I stood, not for a formal toast, but for a simple sentence. The room turned toward me with polite curiosity. I passed the exam, I said, my voice steady and small at once. I'm starting to work at a legal aid center. The room's hum fell off a cliff. A fork chimed against a plate and then stopped midair. My father's face didn't move at first. Only his eyes shifted, narrowing, calculating. My mother's smile remained as a shape, but the warmth left. From across the table, someone tried to rescue the moment. Congratulations, the bride's mother offered, a little too brightly. La! How exciting! The word aid hung unanswered between us like a smoke alarm everyone pretended not to hear. My father set his glass down with care. Are you serious about this path? He asked, the room shrinking until it was only his voice and my heartbeat. Then you no longer have a home. His tone was managerial, like rejecting a bid. Final, efficient. Somewhere behind me, a guest coughed. Catherine stared at her lap. Daniel's jaw clenched and unclenched, as if he could grind this into something less sharp. My mother didn't raise her voice. She shook her head slowly, the pearls at her throat barely moving. You destroyed everything we built for you, she said. For this. The room already understood that phrase as a downgrade, a fall from a height we were supposed to maintain. I felt the table underneath my palms. In the kitchen, a timer went off and was silenced instantly, the way we silenced any sound that didn't fit the narrative. My grandmother's earrings felt heavier. I didn't cry. Not there. My body knew the rule about tears in public. I just swallowed and nodded once, as if someone had asked me to confirm a delivery. People shifted in their chairs, the collective discomfort rustling. The conversation tried to restart in small, jittering pockets. The marina, yes, that tasting menu in Buckhead, who's your planner? The words bumped against the edges of what had just happened and fell away. My mother lifted her glass. To Daniel and Claire, she said, landing the evening back on its rails. The guests followed the cue, relief fizzing like the champagne. I sat down. My chair felt too empty, too final. No one asked me for details. No one said, where will you go? Maybe they assumed I had somewhere lined up. Maybe they believed the threat was symbolic, a correction I would accept before dessert. But the sentence had already been served. That night, the air outside the house felt colder than it should have in Atlanta. I drove home in silence, hands tight on the wheel so I wouldn't see them shake. When I pulled into my building's garage, my phone buzzed with an alert from my bank. Unusual activity detected. The screen showed a long red banner I'd never seen before. I went upstairs, set my bag on the kitchen island, and opened my laptop like a person opening bad news. My checking account read $0. Savings, $0. Even the little travel fund I kept for cheap weekend flights, $0. I refreshed again, as if the numbers might apologize and climb back. But they didn't. I called the bank. A calm woman with a calm voice asked me to hold. I counted the seconds by the hum of my refrigerator. Ms. Allen, she finally said, due to changes in the guarantor arrangement and certain flags on your profile, your accounts have been temporarily restricted pending review. She sounded like she was reading from a laminated card. What guarantor arrangement? I asked, though I already knew. She couldn't tell me, not over the phone, not at this hour. I hung up before I cried at a stranger. I tried my credit cards next, 2 personal and 1 I only used for emergencies. Declined. I typed in the numbers slowly, thinking maybe I'd inverted a digit, as if the problem could be solved by careful fingers. My phone pinged with another alert, security hold. Please visit a branch. I laughed once, a noise that didn't sound like me. I walked through the apartment because I didn't know what else to do. It had always been a beautiful place, a mismatched mug cabinet, a couch I'd chosen from a discount warehouse because it felt soft. Tonight it felt staged, like the rooms were occupied by some other girl's life that I was trespassing in. I hadn't wanted the Allen furniture packages my mother kept offering. I'd wanted to choose my own chipped coffee table at a flea market and carried it up myself. Now even that felt like a set piece I'd borrowed without permission. At 11:12 p.m., the landlord called. He never called. He texted when the pest control guy was coming, slid notices under doors with blue painter's tape when the hallway was getting painted. Elizabeth, he said, voice careful, I'm sorry to contact you so late, but I need to let you know Mr. Allen has withdrawn his personal guarantee. We'll need proof of income at 3 times rent or another guarantor by the 1st. I stared at the microwave clock as if it could argue for me. I just passed the bar, I said, like that was proof of something solid. I start at a legal aid clinic next week. He sighed, the sound a seesaw. I respect the work you do. I do. But policy is policy. He promised to email the formal notice first thing in the morning. We said goodnight like two decent people who both knew the conversation was not decent at all. I stopped moving. My body decided it had had enough and folded onto the couch, but I didn't sleep. I kept seeing the dining room, crystal, silver, the ring, and my father's mouth forming the word home like it was a commodity, not a shelter. Around 3, the fridge kicked on again. The motor sounded like a faraway crowd. At dawn I made coffee with the last of the grounds and drank it black because milk was a luxury I forgot to buy that week. My hands remembered the motions of a normal morning even if my brain didn't recognize the day. I opened my email. The formal notice from the landlord sat there like a fresh bruise. Another email from my mother's personal assistant. Per Mrs. Allen, please note your access to the family club account has been deactivated. There was a smiley face at the end, her habit, like she didn't know what the sentence meant inside my bones. I texted Julia. You awake? She was always awake by 6. Her nurse shift started before most people remembered their dreams. Barely, she replied. Coffee's on. What happened? I typed and erased 3 drafts before sending. My parents cut me off. Everything. Can I come by? She wrote back, yes. Bring a toothbrush. And your softest pajamas. The sage green ones. I stood in my bedroom and looked at my bed as if it were a stranger's. The sheets were still warm from a night I hadn't slept in them. I pulled a duffel from the closet and started with stupid things, socks, moisturizer, the dog-eared novel I read when my brain needed a landing strip. I hesitated at my dresser, opened the jewelry box, and touched my grandmother's bracelet. It was small and simple, a thin band with a clasp that stuck. I fastened it around my wrist instead of putting it in the bag. When I locked the door for what I thought would be a day or 2, I didn't know it would feel like a goodbye. I drove to Julia's through a city that didn't know anything had changed. Dogs dragged their owners down sidewalks. A man jogged holding a coffee cup with impossible coordination. The MARTA train shrieked over the intersection like usual. My car's check engine light flickered, then went away, a tiny mercy. Julia's apartment had the soft clutter of a life lived without an audience. Kids' drawings from her nieces taped above a thrifted console, a basket of mismatched socks, a plant that had survived 3 owners, and an accidental week in the dark. She opened the door in scrubs, hair knotted on top of her head, and pulled me into a hug that I let myself sink into. On her couch, the old one with the spring that poked if you sat wrong, I finally cried. The kind of crying that makes you hold your ribs like you might break them. She handed me tissues, a list. We'll make a plan, she said, already rearranging her life to fit me. For now, the couch is yours. I folded the blanket into a nest and lined up my bag like a barricade. Julia left for her shift with instructions to eat the leftover stir-fry and use the good shampoo. After she left, the quiet pressed close. I opened my wallet and dumped the contents on the coffee table. $18.46 in crumpled bills and coins. I stacked the quarters, then the dimes, then the pennies, as if order could multiply them. When I went to the corner store, I counted change at the register for the first time in my life. The cashier didn't blink. She just slid the receipt toward me like this was ordinary, and maybe it was for most people, but it wasn't for the version of me who had taken price tags for granted. I bought bread, eggs, a banana, and the cheapest coffee they had. Back at the apartment, I opened my laptop and started making a spreadsheet because that's what my brain does when it's drowning. I listed the furniture I could sell: the couch, the armchair, the bed frame, the dining set I'd found secondhand, the rug everyone complimented. I took photos in my emptying apartment, angles that made the pieces look bigger, brighter, more wanted. I posted them with prices that made me wince and added "must pick up" because I could not afford a truck. Within an hour, my phone filled with strangers' messages. "Is this still available? Can you do $40? Will you hold until Friday?" I learned the language of leaving quickly. People came and lifted my life in pieces. A college kid with paint on her hands carried out the coffee table, grinning like she'd found treasure. An older couple took the armchair for their reading nook and promised to love it. I stood by the door with a polite smile and a screwdriver. Every Venmo notification felt like relief and theft at the same time. On the third day, I opened the jewelry box again. The bracelet's clasp stuck the way it always did, as if the piece itself had learned caution. I remembered my grandmother's wrist, the softness of her skin, the way she'd click the clasp and say, "There," as if securing a promise. I couldn't sell it, not really, but I also couldn't not. I took a bus to a strip of shops with neon signs and window bars. The pawn shop bell announced about me. The man behind the counter wore a shirt one size too tight and looked past me to the object, which is what he was trained to do. I set the bracelet down on the black felt. "How much?" My voice tried to sound transactional. He looked at it through a loop, waited, made a small grunt. He quoted a number that made my stomach drop. "It's worth more," I said, hating the pleading in my mouth. He shrugged. "Sentimental value doesn't appraise." He wasn't unkind. He was just correct. I stood there, thumb rubbing the place on my wrist where the metal had warmed to my skin. If I kept it, I would need to sell something else, but there was nothing left to sell that wasn't a part of me. So I nodded. He counted bills. I watched his fingers move like a metronome. When he slid the money across, I didn't touch it right away. I touched the bracelet instead, once, the way you touch a door frame when you leave a childhood room. Then I lifted the cash and folded it into my wallet, which suddenly felt heavier and emptier at the same time. Outside, the afternoon had turned bright and unforgiving. I sat on the curb and breathed until my pulse stopped banging against my throat. I told myself it was only temporary, that I would buy it back the second I could, that love isn't smaller because it changes shape. A week after the pawn shop, I was learning the choreography of small survival. Wake before Julia's alarm, fold the couch blanket, make coffee that tasted like pennies, send another message about a chair I still hadn't sold. I kept my phone on the armrest as if proximity could will good news into it. Around noon, it rang with an old-fashioned tone I hadn't assigned. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, then swiped. "Elizabeth? This is Robert Hudson." The pause that followed carried decades of our family's secrets like a heavy tray. Mr. Hudson had drafted every Allen will I'd ever heard whispered about, settled our disputes with homeowners associations, sent flowers when society required flowers. Hearing his voice felt like someone opening a door to the old house. "Yes," I said, bracing without knowing why. "I can't keep quiet any longer." His voice was tight, as if the words had cut his mouth on the way out. "Your grandmother left you a trust fund. It was created specifically so that you could go your own way. The amount is almost $2 million. For a second, the room tilted. The couch seemed to lean. I pressed my thumb into the seam of the cushion to anchor myself. "I'm sorry," I said, numb. "What?" "An inter vivos trust," he continued, slipping into the careful diction of law. "Irrevocable. Established the year you turned 18. Your grandmother, God rest her soul, insisted it remain confidential until you finished your education. She feared interference." My throat closed around 100 responses. Julia, rinsing a mug in the kitchen, froze when she saw my face. I put the call on speaker, mutely asking her to stay. "Mr. Hudson," I managed, "no one told me." "I know." Paper rustled on his end, the sound of guilt rearranging itself. "Your parents, your father, argued disclosure would be destabilizing. He asked me to delay notification. I complied far longer than I should have. That was my failure." The bracelet-shaped emptiness on my wrist pulsed. What is the current balance? I asked, trying to sound like someone who knew how to ask that question. He cleared his throat. That brings me to the part that requires your immediate attention. Another pause. Your father used the trust as collateral for several corporate credit facilities. He signed guarantee agreements representing authority he did not possess. I stood up, sat down, stood again because my legs didn't trust chairs. He what? It is not only unethical, Hudson said, voice suddenly older, it is unlawful. The trust instrument expressly prohibits encumbrance. There are spendthrift provisions. He was not a trustee. He had no power to pledge those assets. Additionally, he directed our office to route certain notices to a corporate address. I am ashamed to admit I allowed it. Julia mouthed, illegal? I nodded, a dry laugh catching in my chest. How much has been touched? I asked. The word felt wrong. Touch sounded too gentle. The principal remains intact as of this morning, he said quickly, mercifully. However, the bank has filed a UCC, one financing statement that lists the trust as collateral. It's a cloud that must be removed. If the company defaults on any of the facilities, the lender could attempt to claim an interest. They would not succeed in court, given the trust's design, but the fight would be costly and very public. Images flashed, the chandeliered dining room, my father's calm pronouncements, the neon of the pawn shop. He knew, I whispered. All week, I didn't finish. The words would have turned to salt. I should have called you the day you passed the bar, Hudson said. I argued with myself every night. When I learned about what happened at the engagement dinner, I could no longer justify my silence. Your grandmother anticipated this, I'm afraid. She selected an independent institutional trustee to step in if needed. I have already alerted them. We can petition the court for a protective order and instruct the bank to terminate the liens. And the clinic? My voice surprised me. I'm supposed to start Monday. None of this affects your right to work where you choose. In fact, the trust's letter of wishes, he added, softer now, states in your grandmother's hand that the funds are for your education, independence, and the pursuit of meaningful purpose, regardless of family opinion. I can email you a copy. You should see her handwriting. Julia slipped her hand into mine, squeezing once like a metronome for breathing. I need documents, I said. Trust instrument. Schedules. The financing statements. Any correspondence where my father represented authority. You'll have them within the hour. Hudson exhaled as if finally allowed air. I've also scheduled a meeting with the institutional trustee for tomorrow at 10, if you consent. We'll discuss immediate remedies, demand letters to the bank, revocation of any unauthorized powers of attorney, and, if necessary, injunctive relief. What are the odds the bank backs down without a fight? I asked, the law student in me surfacing like a diver who remembered oxygen. Banks do not like publicity about defective liens, he said dryly. And they dislike litigation they are likely to lose. Your father's leverage has always been the assumption that no one would challenge him. That assumption has expired. For a moment, all I could hear was the soft buzz of Julia's refrigerator and the rush of blood behind my ears. $2 million. A trust that spelled my name correctly when my own parents couldn't say it without correcting it. A grandmother who had planned for a future she would never watch me live. Why did she do it? I asked quietly, though I already knew the answer in the shape of every gentle thing she had ever pressed into my palm. Hudson's voice softened to something almost kind. Because she loved you. Because she saw you. And because she understood Charles. I closed my eyes. Behind my eyelids, my grandmother's porch in late summer, the click of that stubborn bracelet clasp, the way she'd tilt her head and say, "Don't let them steal your truth." Not even the ones who call it love. When I opened them, the room was the same, the couch, the Craigslist lamp, the cracked coaster, but everything had shifted by a degree I could feel in my bones. I wasn't rescued. I wasn't ruined. But I was resourced, finally, in the way my grandmother intended. Email me everything, I said. Then call the trustee. Tomorrow at 10 works. I will. He hesitated. Elizabeth. I'm sorry. Me too, I said, and ended the call before either of us could turn the apology into absolution. Julia let out a breath she'd been holding for me. 2 million, she said, eyes wide. It's not a lottery, I answered, surprising myself with how steady I sounded. It's a lifeline. And a mess. I looked at my wrist, at the pale band where the bracelet had been. My phone chimed with new mail. And my grandmother's handwriting filled the screen, tilted, looping, firm. She had put my future in ink when everyone else tried to pencil me into theirs. The elevator opened onto the 27th floor with the soft sigh of money. Frosted glass, a wall of awards, a receptionist whose smile was trained to recognize power. Nothing in the Allen headquarters had changed except me. I arrived not alone but with counsel. Maya Patel walked at my side, with a thin folder under her arm and a brain that could slice through metal filings. We were ushered into the executive conference room, the one with the skyline view that made Atlanta look like a trophy case. My parents were already there, seated at the long table as if nothing had happened, as if a week ago they hadn't stripped me of a life and called it strategy. My father adjusted his cufflinks, then looked up with a neutral expression he reserved for closed-door negotiations. My mother's face was more complicated, perfectly composed, but with the distance of someone posing for a portrait. Elizabeth, my father said, standing just enough to perform courtesy. His gaze slid to Maya with a quick flicker of annoyance. Counsel, he asked, and then, before I could answer, of course. Maya and I sat opposite them. Between us, a spread of papers weighted like chess pieces, trust instrument copies, the trustee's letter, the bank's UCC, one printout, and Maya's draft demand for termination. I placed my grandmother's letter of wishes on top, the page in her angled handwriting a small lighthouse in a sea of typed intimidation. We are ready to give you back access, my father began, voice evenly modulated, but the money must remain with the corporation. Sign this, and everything will be fine. He slid a signature packet across the table, the kind with tabs in cheerful colors, as if compliance could be made festive. Maya didn't touch it. For the record, she said, turning on the small recorder in her phone, this is a meeting regarding the Allen Family Trust and the unauthorized liens placed by Allen Development LLC. All parties present have been identified. Her tone was light, almost friendly. In a hurricane, she would comment on the lovely breeze. My mother clasped her hands. Elizabeth, we all want harmony. Your father and I are willing to restore your privileges immediately, cards, club access, everything, if we can move past this unpleasant misunderstanding. Unpleasant misunderstanding? The words floated like perfume and stung like bleach. I kept my eyes on my grandmother's letter and felt steadier. No, I said, and my voice surprised me with how little it shook. This isn't business. This is my life. A muscle in my father's cheek twitched. Your life, he repeated, as if it were a line item. Your life exists because we built a platform for you. Education, housing, every advantage, remember that when you choose your tone. Maya angled the bank document toward the center. Mr. Allen, she said mildly, the trust includes a spendthrift clause and an express prohibition on encumbrance. You were never a trustee. The lien is defective on its face. Our institutional trustee has directed the bank to terminate its UCC-1 and issue written confirmation within 3 business days. If they do not, we'll seek injunctive relief and sanctions. He glanced at the paperwork as though it had personally offended him. Hyperbole, he said. Lawyers love their toys. Let's be pragmatic. The company has ongoing facilities. The trust can remain as collateral in name only. A harmless fiction. Elizabeth signs, we all move on. Maya folded her hands. You're proposing that my client consent to an illegal encumbrance to preserve your borrowing capacity. It's not illegal, he snapped, the first hairline crack in his calm. It's creative. The word you're looking for, Maya said gently, is void. My mother shot her a look that once made caterers apologize for being born. Elizabeth, you used to be thoughtful, she said, turning back to me. This crusader posture doesn't suit you. Think beyond yourself. There are employees whose livelihoods depend on this company. I am thinking about people, I said. That's why I chose my work. That's why I touched my grandmother's letter, chose to protect me from exactly this. My father leaned forward, palms flat on the table. Okay, We are ready to give you back access, he repeated, slower this time, as if I hadn't heard him, but the money must remain with the corporation. Sign this, and everything will be fine. I didn't look at the packet. No. He exploded so fast the air seemed to change temperature. Without us, you're nothing, he shouted, fists slamming the table, crystal water glasses jumping in their saucers. We'll wipe your name off the map in this town. My body didn't flinch, and the shock of that steadied me further. There it was, naked, the threat he always carried like a concealed weapon. Maya didn't blink. We appreciate the clarity, she said dryly, and slid a letter across the table. Here is a formal demand for the corporation to cease and desist from any further interference with the trust or with Ms. Allen's personal finances. We have also notified the Attorney General's office of the defective filing and the attempted misuse of trust assets. Additionally, we've prepared a complaint for breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and conversion to be filed if the bank does not cure. My mother's knuckles whitened. Robert will not like this, she murmured, meaning Mr. Hudson. She still imagined control as a dinner seating chart. Mr. Hudson already likes it, I said. He called me. He apologized. My father barked a laugh that had no echo. Hudson's a functionary. He'll fall in line. Everyone falls in line. This is how this town works. This is how it worked, Maya corrected politely. Now there's a paper trail. Silence dilated. In the glass wall, our reflections hovered like an accusation. A family posed around a long table, posture perfect, truth finally seated among us without place cards. I thought of the pawn shop bell, of the couch that became a geography, of counting quarters in a corner store while my father counted me out. This is simple, I stated, and it was. Remove the liens. Acknowledge the trust is mine and always has been. Stop interfering with my accounts, my housing, my life. I will not sign anything that keeps my future as collateral for your mistakes. My father's voice dropped to a dangerous softness. And if I don't? Maya answered for me. Then we file. Today, the trustee joins as plaintiff. We seek a temporary restraining order and a preliminary injunction. We subpoena your emails regarding the guarantee. Discovery will be extensive. Very public. You'll explain under oath why you pledged assets you didn't control. Banks dislike being dragged into avoidable litigation. They also dislike borrowers who create reputational risk. Your board will read the filings. Your lenders will read the filings. Your competitors will read the filings. My mother inhaled sharply at the word public, like someone had spilled red wine on a white carpet. I reached for my grandmother's letter and folded it once, carefully, anchoring myself to the crispness. I don't want a war, I said. I want my life back. You told me I didn't have a home. I listened. Now hear me, this is not your asset. It's the one thing in this town that doesn't answer to you. He stared at me, an unreadable mixture of calculation and something I refused to name as hurt. For years, that look made me rearrange myself into whatever shape fit his plan. But today, it slid off me like rain down tempered glass. Finally, he pushed back his chair. The legs scraped the floor, the sound as graceless as the threat had been. Get out, he barked, but it sounded smaller than before. Go play lawyer with your charity friends. Maya rose when I did. We'll expect written confirmation from the bank by close of business, she said, gathering the papers with unhurried precision. If not, you'll be served. We walked toward the door. My mother's voice followed, quiet, stretched thin. Elizabeth, she said. When I turned, she wasn't looking at me. She was watching the letter in my hand. She always was sentimental. The hallway outside felt cooler, lighter, as if the building itself exhaled once we left the room. In the elevator, I pressed the lobby button and let my shoulders drop. Maya checked her watch, then smiled without showing teeth. You were perfect, she said to me. No, I was prepared, I replied. There's a difference. She tipped her head. There is. And now they know it. When the doors opened onto the marble lobby, the receptionist looked up, surprised by something she couldn't name. We passed the wall of awards without slowing. Outside, the heat wrapped the city in its honest grip, uncurated and bright. I slipped my grandmother's letter into my bag, and the weight of it felt like armor rather than burden. The judgment came on a rainy Thursday, typed in a font I'd seen 100 times in law school and never loved more. The court voided the liens, scolded the bank, and recognized my right to the trust as my grandmother intended. The order felt both clinical and holy. By evening, the trustee emailed, "Full control restored." For the first time in my life, I could decide without asking the Allen name for permission. And then I moved. Not across a neighborhood, not into a higher floor with a better view, but out of Atlanta entirely. I picked Nashville almost by accident and then realized I'd been orbiting it for months in my head, far enough to loosen the grip of old expectations, close enough to drive back if something truly demanded it, which, as it turned out, nothing did. I found a one-bedroom in a red brick building tucked behind a coffee shop and a guitar store. There were no grand chandeliers, only a crooked ceiling fan that clicked on humid nights and a window that made the morning light look honest. The first evening, I ate takeout on the floor because my couch hadn't arrived, and still, sitting cross-legged by a stack of boxes, I thought about home. My neighbors introduced themselves slowly, the way people do when they intend to remember your name. Mr. Howard upstairs played pedal steel on Saturdays, soft as rain, and watered my plant when I forgot. A retired teacher named Eileen kept a bowl of butterscotch on the mail table and gossip about the landlord's dog. The building had no doorman, just a keypad and a bulletin board with mismatched thumbtacks. It felt like a promise I could keep. The clinic needed housing lawyers. I needed a desk that wasn't tied to a last name. On my first day, a volunteer named Mateo handed me a stack of intake files and a sticky note that read, "Welcome, Liz, coffee in the back. Printer hates everyone." We called ourselves a legal clinic, but it felt like a storm shelter. People came in shaking, furious, exhausted, proud. We translated notices that were written to intimidate, filed answers, drafted motions, begged extensions, and sometimes, often enough to continue, one time, repairs, dignity. Every day followed a shape I understood. Triage at 9, court at 11, home visits at 2, letters after 4, the printer jamming at exactly the wrong moment. I met a grandmother who'd taped every maintenance request to her fridge like medals. We forced the landlord to treat the mold and replace the heater before winter. She hugged me so tightly my ribs ached for hours. I met a warehouse worker who hadn't missed rent in 13 years until a strike cut his hours. We negotiated a payment plan and watched his shoulders drop 2 inches when the marshal didn't show. I learned the cadence of "you're not alone" in a dozen variations, and every time I said it, I meant it a little more. At night, I took the slow walk home and let myself want small things. A second-hand lamp with a green glass shade for my desk. A thrifted kitchen table the color of honey. A set of mismatched bowls that made soup look braver. I cooked again, badly at first. Julia visited on her long weekends, throwing cilantro like confetti and leaving me careful notes on sticky paper. "Simmer, don't boil, eat when you're tired, proud of you." The scholarship came to me at the laundromat, of all places. I watched quarters spin into the slot and thought of how many students had to choose between meaning and money. My grandmother had made the choice for me when she could. I could make it easier for someone else. I named it the Eliza Allen Award because she'd hate the attention and love the help. The criteria were simple: commitment to public interest law, a statement of purpose that sounded less like a resume and more like a promise, a willingness to take the kind of job that doesn't get you into country clubs. We started with 2 recipients, then 4. I attended the first award brunch at a community center with folding chairs and lemon bars, and I cried only once, behind the ice machine. Life filled in around the work the way sidewalks fill with shade in late afternoon. I learned my barista's name, Keisha, and she learned my order and my bad habit of forgetting my wallet. I joined a pickup soccer group that met in a park with lopsided goals and more enthusiasm than skill. The people in my phone weren't contacts anymore. They were friends who brought casseroles and borrowed books and texted, "Made it home," without asking for anything else. A few months after the judgment, an email slid into my inbox from an address I knew better than my own name, my mother's. The subject line was empty, which for her said more than a paragraph. Inside, a single sentence: "Your father was too harsh. Let's meet." No punctuation beyond the period, as if emotion had been edited out for clarity. Beneath it, a proposed cafe in Buckhead I used to pass on my way to school, the kind of place where conversations could be overheard and therefore monitored. I stared at the screen for a long time. Julia read it over my shoulder and said, "Do you want backup?" I shook my head. "If I bring someone, Mom will perform. If I go alone, she'll perform less." We settled on Saturday, late morning. I took the early bus in from Nashville, a thermos of coffee balanced on my knee like a small shield. The sky over Atlanta looked the same, but the air felt different, like returning to a house you no longer haunt. The cafe smelled like roasted beans and perfume. Sunlight cut rectangles across small marble tables. My mother had chosen a two-top far from the door, back to the wall, a strategist even at espresso. She stood when she saw me, her smile gentle and almost convincing. "Elizabeth," she said, "not Lizzie, not dear, just my full name like a neutral territory." We hugged in the way people do who don't want to disturb their hair. "You look well," she offered, lightly touching the sleeve of my sweater. "Nashville suits you." She hesitated and then added, as if reciting a new script, "I hear the clinic is doing meaningful work." "It is," I said. We ordered. She asked about my apartment as if it were a new restaurant, size, location, whether the light was good in the mornings. I gave her the touring version of my life, condensed, polite, omitting the details that wouldn't fit inside her mirror. When I mentioned the scholarship in my grandmother's name, her eyes flickered. "Your grandmother," she repeated, placing the spoon just so on her saucer, "always did have her projects." The bell over the cafe door chimed. My father walked in. He looked smaller. Not in height, he still carried himself like a man at the head of a table, but in density, like a building after a partial demolition. His hair had surrendered more territory than I remembered, and his hands were trembling in a way that made me think of power lines in a storm. He reached for me and paused, as if surprised to find the distance real. "You seem happy," he said quietly, the words shaped like a complaint and a discovery. "Because I'm finally living my life," I replied. He nodded, lips pressed thin, as if agreement cost him. We sat. My mother folded the conversation around us like a napkin. "We wanted to check in," she began. "Make amends." I looked at my father's hands. They shook when he lifted the cup, a delicate vibration he tried to hide by setting it down too quickly. For a second, compassion overrode history, as swift and dangerous as a rip current. Then he cleared his throat and the tide turned. "Our family," he said, "is navigating headwinds." He went on about lenders, about a reorg that would consolidate risk, about community partners interested in highlighting stories of resilience. My mother's face softened into the expression she wore when pitching charity boards. "Your scholarship," she said carefully, "could be a wonderful way to align narratives. We're hosting the Autumn Gala in November. Imagine a short video about your clinic, your awardees, your grandmother's legacy. We could set up a fund in need. Match donations. It would show unity. Unity in our household had always meant uniformity." "Mom," I said, "the scholarship isn't a centerpiece. It's tuition and rent. It's someone choosing a tenants' rights fellowship without calculating how many nights they'll spend eating rice." She lifted a shoulder. "Optics matter, Elizabeth. People give to what they can see. Your work deserves a larger stage." My father leaned in. "Let's be frank. You have momentum. We have reach. The family can help you scale." There it was, the real invitation, the old language dressed in new fabric. Scale. Leverage. Align. As if my life were a project plan waiting for a sponsor. I sipped my coffee to buy a moment. He watched the cup instead of my face. His hands shook again. This time he didn't hide it. "Are you all right?" I asked, not as a daughter asking a father, but as a human to another. "Fine," he said too quickly. My mother cut in, brisk but tender. "Your father has been under stress. The board is," she stopped herself. "We don't need to discuss that here." "Then why are we here?" I asked softly. My mother's eyes glistened, either with genuine feeling or the careful approximation of it. "Because we miss you," she said. "Because things were said in anger. Because your father can be forceful." She reached across the table, palm up. We'd like to start again. The hand hovered between us like a bridge drawn in chalk. What does start again mean? I asked. In your version. She smiled, relief already seeping in around the edges. Family dinners. Holidays. You can bring a friend, of course. We can set boundaries. No politics, no unpleasantness. And the trust? I asked. My work? My choices. Your choices are your own, she said promptly, then, as if a thread had pulled, and surely there are ways to connect them to the family's legacy. We could establish a housing initiative under the foundation, Allen Homes, perhaps with you as director. You'd have resources. Infrastructure. No more worrying about grant cycles. Director. Infrastructure. A gilded cage with ergonomic seating. My father nodded, businesslike. We've engaged a PR firm to help with the aftermath. They recommended a reconciliation story. Daughter returns, differences set aside, the family united in service. It would play well. Heal old wounds. Help recruitment, too. Young talent wants to see values. I stared at him. My coffee had gone cold. You're still doing it? I said, more to myself than to them. You're talking about me like a lever. A headline. He opened his mouth. My mother touched his sleeve. Her voice fell to a hush. Elizabeth, please. We love you. We want you close. I believed that she believed it. But I also believed that love in our house meant proximity to control. He tried another route. The clinic can be one of our grantees, he offered. A significant one. We'll help you secure a building, maybe near our newest development. Imagine the ribbon cutting. Press, partners, you speaking about access to justice. Next to luxury condos, I interrupted. A clinic as a charm bracelet. My mother flinched at the word bracelet, the ghost of my grandmother on the table between us. For a moment, none of us spoke. Outside, a dog barked. Plates clinked. Life continued without our permission, as it always does. Dad, I said finally, when you told me I didn't have a home, I believed you. But now I have one. It's small and it's mine. The clinic is not a stage for the family's redemption. The scholarship is not B-roll for a gala. If you want reconciliation, it can't be tied to your optics. He exhaled through his nose, the sound of a man recalculating. There has to be a middle ground. There is, I said. It looks like coffee sometimes. It looks like sending me articles you think I'll like. It looks like asking if I'm sleeping and listening to the answer. It doesn't look like a press release. My mother rubbed a fingertip along the rim of her cup. What about dinners? She asked. Without the board. Without expectations. Maybe, I said. But not if dinner includes a pitch. The tremor in my father's hands was harder to watch up close. He caught me looking and curled his fingers into fists to stop it. I could care about his health and still refuse his terms. Both could be true. Both had to be. Elizabeth, he said, quiet for him, you're making a mistake. In your world, I said. In mine, I'm making room. He leaned back, offended by the geometry. My mother pressed 2 fingers to her temple, a gesture she used when a headache approached. We can revisit, she murmured. Perhaps after the holiday. There it was, the punt, wrapped in civility. We stood to leave. She hugged me longer this time. He patted my shoulder twice like we'd closed something. On the sidewalk, the sun felt harsher than it had an hour before. They headed to the parking garage. I stayed on the curb, watching their silhouettes fold into the city. My phone buzzed. A text from Tasha at the clinic. Judge moved the Harper hearing to Tuesday. Can you do it? Another from Keisha. Got in a new Ethiopian roast. First cup on me. A third from Julia. How'd it go? Do you need tacos or a nap? I looked back through the cafe window. My parents stood at the counter, talking to the manager with smiles they wore like suits. Even this moment had become a small chance to reinforce a brand, generous, gracious, composed. New masks, old faces. A year has passed, and I measure time now in motions filed and doors I have watched stay open because someone finally had a lawyer. I keep a list on my desk, not for trophies but for truth. The injunction that stopped the demolition of the Maple Court apartments 2 days before winter. The consent decree that forced a developer to remediate mold in 3 buildings and refund months of illegally collected fees. I did not become a legend. I became reliable. Tenants learned my name and my hours. Caseworkers arrived with thick folders and thin time. I made coffee, read every page, and taught clients how to breathe through hearings. The same developers kept showing up with new LLCs and old habits. We kept showing up, too, me, Tasha, Mateo, the volunteers, the clinic's cranky printer. We were never glamorous. But we were present. The cases got bigger than I expected. One started as a single mother's eviction and became a class action against a company that built amenities and forgot about heat. Another began with a crumpled maintenance request and ended with a citywide ordinance requiring transparent repair timelines. Reporters started calling, and then so did friends of friends. I learned how to say on background and how to keep my clients' faces off screens if they didn't want them there. I logged off most nights intending to rest and then found messages waiting. Saw your win. Shared your post, my aunt cried. My church put your clinic on our prayer list. I didn't plan the attention. It arrived like weather. Facebook, of all places, became a chorus. Photos of ribbon cuttings were replaced by photos of repaired playgrounds and new smoke detectors. My inbox filled with screenshots of neighborhood groups arguing about habitability and law in the same breath. A grandmother I had hugged in a hallway tagged me under a picture of her grandkids doing homework in a dry bedroom. This lawyer fought for us, she wrote. The posts traveled farther than I did. A college friend messaged from Oregon to say her mom had read about that Nashville lawyer on Facebook and only realized later the story was mine. An old classmate from Atlanta shared a clip with the caption, "Proud of you," and suddenly people who used to ask me for table assignments were asking how to donate to the clinic. The attention embarrassed me a little. I told them to give to the scholarship instead. The Eliza Allen Award grew from 4 students to 8. At our second brunch, the awardees took turns reading the first case they wanted to lose sleep over. Back home, the family business faltered without my grandmother's trust propping up the books. Lenders called terms what terms had always been. A project stalled, a partnership dissolved, a board member stepped down with a statement about realignment. People sent me articles I didn't ask for, and I read them without the old nausea. I did not savor the stumbles. I did not send links to anyone. I felt informed. That was all. The hardest lesson was that I could care about my father's health and still not carry his company's consequences on my back. The day I finally believed both could be true, guilt unclenched like a fist around my lungs and did not return. My mother tried to revive our old rituals in smaller, softer ways. A card with a watercolor of a house and the line, "Proud of your work." An invitation to a quiet lunch with no agenda that actually had no agenda. A donation to the scholarship in an amount I knew she had chosen for meaning instead of publicity. Later, I walked home under a sky the color of dishwater and thought about architecture. My father built towers that pierced clouds. And I billed time, 30 days to cure a violation, 7 to answer a notice, 1 afternoon when a marshal doesn't knock. And now I don't measure myself by chandeliers, gala invitations, or the whispers of high society. I measure my life by the people I help, the cases I win, and the young law students who tell me, because of your scholarship, I can keep going. That is the legacy my grandmother would have wanted. A family that loves conditionally is not a family. It's a performance, a transaction, a fragile deal where affection is bought and sold. My parents proved that to me the night they told me I had no home. But instead of breaking me, they freed me. They forced me to build something stronger, not out of marble or brick, but out of courage, truth, and my refusal to bend. Yes, I lost the glittering Allen name. Yes, I lost my seat at the table that had been set for me since birth. But I gained something greater, a new table where everyone is welcome, where no one is measured by their worth to a corporation or a social club. I am no longer the daughter who disappointed her parents. I am Elizabeth Allen, attorney, advocate, granddaughter, and woman who will never again apologize for walking her own path. Sometimes, I wonder if my parents realized the irony. In trying to erase me, they made me visible to the world. And what about you? Have you ever been cast aside by the very people who should have loved you unconditionally? Write your own story in the comments below. I promise, you're not alone. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Any support keeps these stories alive and helps others who feel alone in their struggles.